Life has no purpose and we are useless, thus we don't matter. These were the ideas that began to consume a whole generation after Darwinism emerged, casting its shadow over faith and belief as scientific facts took center stage. If humans were created from nothingness, if we were just atoms and molecules with no greater purpose, why should anything matter? This mindset created a void, a gaping emptiness that became known as nihilism. With this rise, religion lost its hold on people's minds and its ability to shape how they thought and behaved. For centuries, religion had provided meaning, purpose, and moral guidance, touching every aspect of life, acting as the cornerstone for universal principles and a cohesive view of the world and humanity's place in it. But nihilism, utilitarianism, and secularism started to undermine this basis. Tolstoy, Nietzsche, Camus, and perhaps most significantly Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was not well known in his day, produced works that were nothing short of extraordinary. He had a special talent for delving into the depths of human nature and deriving meaning from the chaos and disorder of life. And one of his masterpieces was a warning about the cost of such a shift. Through the lives of its protagonists, Crime and Punishment offers as a sobering warning to humanity about the perils of these contemporary ideologies that feel just as urgent today as they did. Then in this video I'll explore how Dewey used his work to caution against the very forces we continue to grapple with in the modern world: egoism and alienation. Raskolnikov, the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, was a struggling student who moved to St. Petersburg to study law, a handsome man. By appearance, Raskolnikov nevertheless preferred to spend his time alone. His life can be divided into three distinct parts. The first part of his life sees him as a student plagued by confusion and internal conflict. He is absorbed in the philosophies of rationalism, utilitarianism, and nihilism, and spends much of his time wrestling with these ideas in solitude. In the second part of his life, he commits a murder, an act that profoundly affects him. Consumed by guilt and fear, he begins to alienate himself from society, descending into madness. The third part of his life finds him in prison, where he is, of course, utterly alone. In the first two phases of his life, Raskolnikov consistently pushes people away who try to help him, driven by an inflated sense of superiority. His ego leads him to believe that he is a man apart from others, destined for something greater. Before committing the murder, Raskolnikov writes an article for a newspaper in which he distinguishes between two types of people: ordinary individuals who follow societal rules and religious principles, and those who are beyond these constraints, people he believes are entitled to break societal rules in the pursuit of a higher purpose. Although he does not use the term Uber-Mch, it is clear that he aligns himself with Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or Superman, an individual who does not adhere to societal norms and is often isolated in his journey. Raskolnikov sees himself as a man who will change the way society operates. Raskolnikov also has one friend, Razum Mikan, who starts a business and invites him to join. However, Raskolnikov rejects this offer, preferring instead to remain isolated, avoiding human interaction and staying within his comfort music zone. While we may not all share his sense of superiority, a part of the alienation he experiences is something we can relate to. This isolation, this retreat into ourselves, can create a void, one in which nihilism and utilitarianism, much like For Raskolnikov can take root it was within this void that he ultimately justified his heinous music, nihilism and utilitarianism. Actions as mentioned earlier. Raskolnikov, the protagonist, believes in two types of people: ordinary individuals and those who are superhumans. To him, superhumans are figures like Napoleon capable of breaking any societal rule to achieve results for the greater good of society. According to Raskolnikov, if an action benefits society as a whole, it is justified regardless of moral implications. This philosophy bears a striking resemblance to the ideas of Niccolò Machiavelli, who in his book The Prince argued that the ends justify the means. Machiavelli was so controversial that his work was banned for many years, with some considering him the enemy of humanity. Raskolnikov follows a similar utilitarian path. Justifying his crime, he dismisses any moral code in the process, believing the act is justified for the supposed greater good. Raskolnikov is further influenced by a conversation he overhears in which a student refers to Alona as a louse due to her mistreatment of the poor and her mentally challenged sister. The student suggests that she should be eliminated for the benefit of society. This conversation reinforces Raskolnikov's belief that the PWN broker's death and even the murder of her sister who witnesses the crime would be justified for the sake of societal improvement. Fyodor Dostoevsky issues a warning about the dangers of these philosophies where individuals justify heinous acts based on an alleged greater good. This same criticism was leveled against Machiavelli's ideas, which, despite offering a brilliant analysis of human nature, were ultimately seen as incompatible with a stable moral society. Dov's critique is clear: when people begin justifying their actions through utilitarianism or nihilism, it leads to destruction. Another character in the novel, Sidrigov, exemplifies the moral consequences of following such a path. Sidrigov represents the figure Raskolnikov might have hoped to become, but in a negative light he violates every moral code, having killed his wife and preyed on women, even blackmailing Duna. Raskolnikov's sister Duna, in self-defense, tries to shoot him, but the moment he realizes that Duna will never be interested in him drives him into despair. This realization leads Fyodor to suicide. We can trace his descent from absurdism to nihilism. First he embraces the absurdity of life, but ultimately nihilism claims him as the belief that nothing has meaning overpowers him entirely. Dov's exploration of nihilism doesn't end with crime and punishment. In his earlier work, Notes from Underground, he presents the character of the underground man who falls deeper into isolation, self-loathing, and an utter refusal to seek help even as his physical health deteriorates. His nihilism leads him to feel insignificant, trapped in bitterness and despair, unable to find any value in life or in relationships despite initially attempting to find meaning. There's another theme that has been beautifully absorbed in almost every character of crime and punishment, which was the leading cause of those heinous acts everyone was involved in: poverty and free will. Music. Raskolnikov was a poor man from a struggling family. He used his mother's pension to pay for his tuition fees. His sister, a compassionate and beautiful woman, was deeply concerned about him. She almost married a wealthy man despite not wanting to, simply so her brother could continue his education. Raskolnikov's so-called girlfriend Sonia was a devoted woman, but she resorted to prostitution to support her family. Witnessing this, Raskolnikov became desperate to get rich quickly, not just to help his family but also to assist other poor people. He convinced himself that killing the wealthy old PWN broker and stealing her money would solve his problems. However, this did not bring him the long-term relief he hoped. For Fyodor Dostoevsky's message here is clear. Poverty can lead people to compromise. Their values sell their bodies, souls, and, most tragically, their free will. This mirrors Franz Kafka's metamorphosis, in which the protagonist's free will is gradually destroyed by his parents, the need for money, and his sister. Similarly, Raskolnikov found himself trapped in a cycle of misery, where his choices seemed dictated by his circumstances. His belief in nihilism gave him a false sense of freedom, allowing him to justify his crime. He saw himself as an extraordinary person above the moral laws that bound others, rationalizing that his suffering and poverty gave him the right to break those laws. Thus, Raskolnikov's nihilistic philosophy, combined with his impoverished state, reduced his free will to an illusion. Every decision he made seemed controlled by the overwhelming forces of his environment and inner conflict, just like Kafka's character who lost his autonomy to family duty. Raskolnikov's free will was sacrificed to his own flawed ideology, leaving him morally and spiritually bankrupt, eventually consumed by guilt and tormented by nightmares. Raskolnikov became perceived as a madman by his friends. He realized he needed to confess his crime to find peace, which he did to Sonia. Sonia then encouraged him to surrender, which he did. He was sentenced to 8 years in a Siberian prison, but the time in jail gave him more than he expected. It gave him a sense of meaning in music, meaning of life. Life when reason fails. The devil helps. The protagonist needed an axe to commit the murder he had been struggling to get one for some time. Reason said to him, "Don't murder," but there the axe just sitting there, gleaming, almost calling to him. The devil provided the very tool he needed. He stole it, and in doing so lost all reason. He began to justify his actions, allowing the devil to enter his soul. The fact that his spirits were raised extraordinarily shows he had lost his reason, his morals, his ability to act rationally. He had succumbed to the call of evil, but this fleeting confidence was nothing but a trap. Raskolnikov didn't initially believe in the devil or any external force guiding him, but the act itself became a never-ending torment. The crime shattered his peace as his conscience rebelled against the very rationale he used to justify his actions. The devil's help turned into a curse, leaving him spiraling into mental anguish. His disbelief in such forces provided no comfort, as the torment he inflicted upon himself was deeper than any external punishment. In trying to prove his strength and transcend morality, he unraveled, instead unable to find peace in either reason or rebellion. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the protagonist's life can be divided into 3 parts. The first 2 parts were chaotic and meaningless due to his belief in nihilism. He never found peace. Fyodor Dostoevsky often portrays characters in his novels who are in constant conflict with their own demons, showing how flawed we all are, prone to judgment and hypocrisy. Yet these flaws can be overcome by becoming more authentic human beings, by learning to see beauty in the world. Raskolnikov saw beauty and hope in Sonia, a prostitute, but one who was faithful throughout his life. He had pushed away everyone he loved, but in the depths of his depression he saw something in Sonia and eventually confessed, leading him to surrender. She even visited him in prison. Raskolnikov then came to believe he was in love with her. He saw hope in love and began to study the Bible. This journey is quite similar to the one Tolstoy embarked upon when he sought meaning in his own life. Though a wealthy man, Tolstoy questioned the very existence of life, and through studying, ultimately found peace in God. So this was the ending of a beautiful novel, and my video too.